Hi everyone, I'm Brent. I'm so glad you're joining us today for a walk through San Antonio. We're just waiting for some friends to join us as we get going here in the city. And so we're hanging out and we're waiting. And this is a city filled with people who like to be friendly. And so I'm excited to get to talk with some of y'all and interact with you today as we go on a tour today in San Antonio. It's a great city, and often it has fantastic weather. We have 330 days of sunshine in San Antonio, we like to say. Today is not one of them, and so that means you get an exclusive look at something you only see rarely throughout the year. We have kind of rainy conditions, a little bit misty, a little bit overcast, but that's all right. The city still shines bright, as does its history. As you're coming on board, please say hello and let me know where you're from. I'd love to know what city you're watching from today. That would be fantastic. Certainly, I want to hear about your cities as I'm telling you about my own today. So we're just going to hang out for a little bit, and I'll be looking at comments that you all make on YouTube. So if you're watching over on Facebook, we're so glad that you're with us today. But YouTube is where, if you go over to that channel, I'll be able to see the comments that you leave, and I can respond to your questions, and we can have a little more interaction. So this is a great time to hop over there to YouTube if you're able to do that. So just checking my phone, making sure I haven't missed any comments from you all. I'll tell you, the weekends are pretty quiet here on the Riverwalk these days, but especially this morning as it's misty and overcast. Typically, Sunday mornings is where you find downtown the quietest, and there's not a lot of traffic on the sidewalks or the river itself. We'll be learning about that river, and so we can just enjoy it without the crowds, and I'm always grateful for that perspective. It's one of my favorite times to actually come down with a tour group. So, if you're in San Antonio, that's the word of the wise. You want to avoid 100,000 people here trying to navigate the sidewalks together. Sunday mornings is a great time to explore. We're right by a bridge, so you may hear some street noise. That's all right. We're glad for people that are downtown this morning, just like you and I are, as we're waiting for the tour to start here. So, all right, I'm gonna check my phone again. If you see me on my phone, it is not because I'm in the middle of a good novel. It is because I'm excited for this chat that we get to have today. All right, we're waiting. So, San Antonio, we have visitors from all over the place, and as I'm looking down at the river right now, there's a elderly couple, and there's a couple with a stroller, and looks like a college student over there, and we've got a guy with a cowboy hat. The quintessential Texas experience is to see someone with a cowboy hat, so there we have a friend hiding behind the umbrella there, but that's all right. Some Texans are bashful like that. We actually had a store, we still do, in San Antonio called Paris Hatters, and people wanting Western wear from all over the world would go to that store, including John Wayne even picked up a few hats there. The store's around 100 years old now, and it's just a few streets away from us, so perhaps that gentleman with his cowboy hat, maybe that's where he went. You may notice I don't have a cowboy hat on right now. Texans come in many shapes and forms. Not all of us are wearing those cowboy hats this morning. Everyone downtown is hearing a fire brigade go by though, so like I said, there's a lot of excitement about getting to be downtown. I'm so glad you're here. If you haven't had a chance already, please let us know where you're watching from, the city. I'd love to learn more about you as we're waiting to start the tour. Just a few more minutes this morning.
2 minutes and we'll go.
Great, yeah, roughly 2 minutes or so. Roughly 2 more minutes. We just need the rain not to wash us away in that matter of time. I think we're going to be okay. They say in San Antonio, either you have too much water or you have too little water. That actually factors into our history quite strongly. Maybe I'll get a touch on that in a second. So We're grateful for the rain. If it rains on your wedding day in Texas, people say, what fortuitous conditions for a ceremony, this rarity, this good luck that we consider here in Texas. I hear some ducks. You know, the water behind me, I'm going to talk about this river. It's one of the favorite things people want to see when they come to San Antonio. Some people think it's like Disney World, entirely man-made, and that's not the case at all. It's a natural river and has all kinds of wildlife that we see. So occasionally there's some turtles. Often we see ducks. Even now I'm hearing them in the distance as they're calling to each other. Probably, talking about the fire engines themselves. And I don't know, maybe there's a tour of ducklings getting ready to launch as well. You never know what's taking place down here on the river these days. Just a few more minutes. I so appreciate your patience as we're getting things going here. I'm going to check my phone again.
So just so you know, and the audience knows, I made a small mistake when I was setting up the start time on YouTube.
Yes.
Which is the reason why we started at 10 minutes till noon, but YouTube doesn't think that we start until noon.
Sure.
And that's why right now we're just live up on Facebook, not on YouTube, for those people that are waiting for the YouTube to start.
Those of you on Facebook, this is your big moment. Exclusively for you on Facebook, I'm saying welcome to you today. I'm also saying in a minute you should be able to jump over there to YouTube. I'd love to see some of your comments, to hear your voice today. And specifically, I want to know where you're watching from, because that's important to me. Growing up, I loved traveling the world. I still do. But I learned that I don't do well constantly on a plane every single day. It wears you down pretty quickly. And so I'm thrilled to be in San Antonio and to get to meet people from all over the world that come here to my city. And that's one of my favorite parts of this work, is getting to meet people from different cities and countries that are coming through. So say hi, let me know where you're from, and I'll tell you a bit of our city, maybe as it connects to where you're from. So.
Great, we can do it, yeah.
All right, well, we've got a great cameraman today, and I'm so grateful for him. Chris is helping us today. And listen, my name is Brent. If you missed that earlier, I'm with Amigo Walking Tours here in San Antonio. I love my city. I love every visitor that I get to welcome here. On a typical year, we have almost 39 million visitors that come to San Antonio. That's the number they tell us. Today, you get to be that person, even though it's digitally. I'm so glad to have Santaman's live here in our city and to get to welcome you and share a bit about the place I love with people I love. That's you, wherever you are. So say hi. Come on, don't be a stranger. I want to hear from you. Let me tell you briefly about myself. I'm originally from San Antonio. This is my hometown, not downtown. I lived out in the suburbs as I grew up. But I've spent my life here. I went away for 4 years for university, and I went to Europe for 2 years and lived in London, where the weather often had elephant gray skies, just like what we're seeing today. And I had the opportunity to stay in London. I thought, what a fantastic city this is, but I missed home. I missed San Antonio. So I came back here. I get to give tours to all kinds of folks, but these are free tours, generally speaking. And so we love all these different visitors and getting to show them the best of San Antonio, no matter what their budget is. But what makes it possible is that folks are willing to tip, that they are willing to say, this was something that added value to our time in San Antonio. And so I want to symbolize that with a gift. It can be $5, or it can be $50, or I don't know, $100. I think was the best tip I ever got from someone. You're welcome to give anywhere in that. If you get a chance today, it's very appreciated. That's how these free tours work, just so you're familiar. Listen, we're not going to stand here all day. It's a walking tour after all. I just want to describe to you San Antonio. I want to maybe tell you that Texas looks differently than what you might imagine. If you're watching, like I said, first, let me know what country you're watching from. I want to hear that. Secondly, what expectations do you have of Texas? What do you imagine when you hear Texas? when you said, oh man, it's a live tour of Texas today, of San Antonio with Sandemans. Man, I hope that I see, what? Tell me. A lot of people picture cowboys. They picture Western hats and jeans and cowboy boots. I'll touch on that. But listen, our history actually is very European in this city of San Antonio. The fact that we have a city here is a race between two European nations, that of Spain and France. And they wanted to claim territory in North America. 1685, Spanish explorers come here and they plant a flag. 1691, they plant this flag and they say this territory belongs to the King of Spain. And so our roots go all the way back to these two nations across the Atlantic. Well, today we are surrounded by a city that's very much influenced by Europe still. And so as we walk, I'm going to tell you about this water. You see, the river here in San Antonio, we call this the Riverwalk. And if you Google San Antonio, this is likely one of the first images you're going to see. But when the Spanish explorers came in 1691, they wrote in their journals, man, the water is fresh, it's good, the soil is rich, and this land is unlike any other place we've seen before. They specifically mention these waters. And this water, it just starts about 4 miles north of here, around 7 kilometers or so. North is the mouth of this water, and it will flow all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. Because of our good waters in San Antonio, this winds up being the biggest city in this area in our history. In fact, it was the largest city in Texas all the way until the Great Depression came along and changed world history, certainly changed local history. Well, people would come here for not just the water, but because it became just a center for commerce and for business eventually. And so if you were a cowboy, remember a lot of people think of cowboys when they hear Texas. If you were a cowboy, then maybe you came here to do a business transaction, to sell some cattle, or to go shopping at Christmas time. Would you believe it? Some of our biggest crowds historically would come in at Christmas to just buy something, maybe a dress for their daughter or a toy horse for their son, who knows. But Christmas is very important to us. We love Christmas in San Antonio. And in fact, we still have a telltale sign of Christmas. There's some lights that are hanging from this tree here. At Christmas time, they light up the trees. A guy climbs the trunk of the tree and he will throw down these lines of lights so they are all lit every year in about October by hand. And then they take them down normally in January. But because of COVID and how it's affected tourism, the mayor of San Antonio said, let's have lights. Let's have them a little bit longer than we normally do. And so we have them up this year until February 14th. So we have about a little less than a month left with them. A lot of these businesses closed during COVID-19. So you'll see banners saying, welcome back, now open. You know, we're ready for commerce to come. So this is very much something that we're seeing this month. We're seeing it last month during these interesting days of 2020. Interesting, to put it nicely, right? Come here, I want to walk down the street. I want to show you something talking about business, specifically about those cowboys. Listen, if you were a good cowboy, you would always look twice before you cross the street. Secondly, you would be coming to San Antonio hoping for a business deal. You, as I said earlier, may have some cattle with you, and you might not have any money in your pocket, but by George, you're hoping to become wealthy with a business transaction. I always think of that when I see this building. You can see that there's different heads of animals on the exterior, a water buffalo here, and a Texas longhorn, and we have also, it looks like an elk perhaps. Now, listen, why this is interesting is because this saloon is called the Buckhorn Saloon. It started in 1881. And what was interesting, it was just a watering hole. It was a place when you ride into San Antonio that you can get a drink and put up your feet and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I finally made it to San Antonio. you have one problem. You don't have money in your pocket. And Buckhorn Saloon said, hold on, maybe there's a solution to this. They said, did you find anything interesting along your journey as you came to San Antonio? And a cowboy would say, well, I found this rattlesnake rattle, would you? And they'd say, I'll trade you that for a drink. I'll trade you that for a piece of food. And so today, the Buckhorn Saloon, it's still a saloon. You can still stop by for a drink. But really, it's a museum filled with all these antlers and rattles and all these things that cowboys picked up on their journeys as they rode to San Antonio. And they said, I don't got much, but I've got this. What can you give me for a rattlesnake rattle? Well, creativity is a big part of San Antonio, and that goes to our river as well. So in just a second, I want to walk down the stairs and tell you more about our river that we have today, but first I want to check my phone and see
Facebook,
some of the comments that are coming in, and I'm actually going to turn over to Facebook because I understand that we're having some good comments there.
The video will be up on YouTube later on.
Okay.
It's just for whatever reason not live streaming there right now. So it's going to the Facebook audience. I've posted up on YouTube to let people know.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad to see the comments over on Facebook. So if you're a cool kid, that's where we're hanging out today. And I'm just looking through right now and trying to see some of these great comments. John, thanks so much. I'm sure you look amazing wherever you are at the moment, but we're thrilled to be here in San Antonio. From Spain, Chris, thank you so much. I wonder what part of Spain you're from. I'd love to hear more about that. From Istanbul, Turkey, there's a place on the Riverwalk, I think of the Sistine Basilica every time I see it. And so I'm thrilled that you're here, Juliuston. And we have, again, another visitor from Spain. Andrea, thank you. Mexico. And from England. Tell me what part of England you're from. I used to live in two parts of England. In London, I lived in South Ken for a while, and I lived in Balham. I attended grad school there. I loved my time in London. I'm thrilled to be back in San Antonio. So I want to pause for just a second. Let me tell you about this river before we go down the stairs to talk about it. Listen, I told you those Spanish explorers, 1691, they plant a flag here. And they say this place is good. It's rich. The waters are good. That's why we wind up with a city here. I told you it's been either in Texas we have too much water or too little water. Well, listen, flooding is a big issue here in San Antonio. We wind up having a series of floods. But in 1921, we had a flood that brought 9 to 12 feet of water at street level. That's about 2 meters high of water at street level. And it was not good. And so they talked about this river. They said it goes through the downtown area. We should get rid of it because it's a danger. It's not a blessing. It's a monster waiting to snatch your children out of your bed. Literally, they say over the course of some of these floods, they would take place at night, and that parents would go to get their children, and the kids would be washed away with the waters by the time the parents had awoken and gone to escape. So listen, the water very much presented challenges to us as a city. And we'll just pause here for a second, and I want you to understand. They said, it's not good. Reroute the river somewhere else. Let's try to repurpose this area that the river's occupied. I mean, think of the value of this real estate. If it was filled in with dirt, you could build buildings here. Well, a man comes along and he says, listen, there are those in our community saying we need to respect this river. His name's Robert Hugman. He's only about 28 years old. I'm 31 years old. So you can imagine if I approached the city with a big idea, they'd be like, wow, great, thanks for sharing. Well, that's kind of how they responded to Robert Hugman. He said, if we can respect the river, he said, I have a plan for how we can develop this and make it a place that is not only beautiful, but has business. He said, I have a master plan for stores and hotels and restaurants. And it could be something that brings value to San Antonio if we can just control the water. Initially, the city didn't like his plan at all, but by George, after 10 years of fighting for it, that's what we wind up with, is the fine work of Robert Hugman. And so it has a very Venetian feel to it. One of the things people have called San Antonio is the American Venice. And if you're from Italy, if you're from Venice, you might say, okay, that's a stretch. And I think there are some who would agree with it, but it is very much a place where this water just comes straight up to the sidewalk and you walk along the canals. In fact, I want to show you a map to help you better understand where we are in relation to this river. I told you the water's starting just a short ways from here to the north. It's coming down in this direction. And originally it would flow around this circuit. This is where we are right now, is in this little bend, and then it would go south. Robert Hugman, part of the work that took place following the flood here in 1921, they added a bypass channel so that we can have floods still go through and beyond the city, but then they kept this inner loop. This is the original loop of San Antonio where the water was. So thanks to Robert Hugman and others who advocated to protect this waterway, we still enjoy it here 303 years after the city was originally started. Now,
Brent, could you give us a sense on the map of where we're going to be headed today?
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So just so you know, we just crossed over this bridge here at Presa, and we are where that gaping hole is. We are briefly going to walk on the river, just honestly a few yards, and then we'll turn in, we'll cross into the Alamo Plaza and see the Alamo. And after that, we'll talk a bit about the trees and everything that we see in that plaza, a little bit of the history of Texas, both present day and extended. So it's not extremely long as a route. It's only 45 minutes or so. So we're going to have a great time together, all the same though. Here's what I wanted to tell you about the European connections to San Antonio. Robert Hugman said it could be like Venice, not just that we have water and sidewalks together, but also that we have bridges under which gondolas can pass and folks can ride on these gondolas. You'll notice that they're really high arch so that these individuals that are steering the gondolas, who are making them move, can stand on the gondola as they pass under. And it creates a beautiful environment that we see today thanks to his master plan. In fact, most of the buildings that you're going to see are either restaurants, they're boutique stores, or they're hotels, exactly as Robert Hugman had described it would be in 1928 when he presented that plan. He had to advocate for about 10 years for it. Construction started in 1938, took 4 years to build what we see here today. As we go around the corner, I want to show you, you can catch just a glimpse of one of those high arched bridges, kind of in the Venetian style. It's right there at the edge of the water, kind of at the furthest extreme of the bank from where we are. You see a walkway, a concrete walkway with that high arch to it. We have people from all over the world that come here. Even the King and Queen of Spain were here in 2018, walking along parts of our downtown, just like you are today. So thanks for being the royalty on today's tour. If you haven't gotten a chance to introduce yourself and where you're from, I'd love to hear that, what your thoughts are about Texas. Have you been here? Let me know. I want to talk with you. I'll tell you who stopped by in 1991, speaking of royalty. Queen Elizabeth II got on one of these river barges, one of these boats, and she went down the river. There's a picture of her just where we are right now, in fact, as she took in San Antonio. I imagine that was quite a sight to see the Queen of England floating along with the ducks. I want to pause for a second and check the comments that you all are leaving on Facebook. Listen, I know all of my stories. I don't need to hear myself talk. I want to hear from you. So thank you so much for chiming in today. Let me see who we have joining us and if there are some more comments. I don't see any at the moment that I see. Let me see here. Awesome, Mexico. There you go. I think my phone is lagging a bit. From Yorkshire. Very good. I'm so glad you're here. And Coyote and Carmen, so glad. Listen, if you have questions about San Antonio, if you say, Brent, that didn't make sense, or you know what I want to see, just let me know. I'll do what I can to welcome you while you're in my city. Listen, when I call it my city, I mean that. I was born in Austin, which is just an hour and a half from here. born in Austin. 3 days later, I moved here to San Antonio. I said, Mom, Dad, it's nice to meet you. So glad that you're here and that you're welcoming. Now let's talk about the city. So we moved to San Antonio, and I've called this home ever since I was 3 days old. When I was a kid, I would come down here to the Riverwalk, specifically to this building we're about to go through. This is the Hyatt Regency Hotel. It's noteworthy for a couple of reasons, but one thing that I would always notice as a kid was the glass elevators. My parents would let me ride up and down on these elevators. They told me it was a bit like Disney World. I'm not sure if that was true or not, but it was great when you're 5 years old or so. The first time I saw a player piano was right here in the hotel and its lobby. I thought, man, look at that thing playing itself. But this hotel was built in 1981, and it represents something cool about San Antonio. You see, we respect our history here, we respect our culture, and we try to protect it. We try to incorporate nature and urban development hand in hand. As you're looking at the Riverwalk, and you can see that our streets and our restaurants are right along the banks of this park and this river. So here's what happens. When they construct this hotel in 1981, they said we're going to add an element of historical significance to it, and they have water that travels through the lobby of this hotel. And so in just a second, I'm going to walk you along those walkways, and you can observe this water, but it represents something specifically. It's not just nature, it also represents something called the acequias. They were these channels that would take water from the main river and carry it to further locations that were further out. So listen, if you and I were in San Antonio and we wanted to build a house, it means we don't have to fight each other on the banks of the river. We can spread out a bit, we can breathe. Boy, don't we have an appreciation for spreading out a bit these days. And so that's what the acequias allowed those Spanish founders of San Antonio to do as they laid out San Antonio. Today, the streets of our downtown actually follow many of the contours of those acequias, those channels of water that went through our downtown. So as we walk through this hotel, I want to tell you, I need to put on my mask because we do have some city ordinances in San Antonio right now. Me being out here in an area that is not crowded is no problem for me not to have a mask on as we're outdoors. But as I go inside, I do need to put on my mask. And as we walk through the lobby of this hotel, it's a public passageway. I want you to observe. Look at that water. Look how they've incorporated this structure from 1981 into the river that we've loved since 1691. Wow, what amazing history. I'll talk to you on the other side. Oh, by the way, let's look at this. It's some signage that you're going to find on most buildings here in, honestly, I don't know if it's Texas or as a whole or San Antonio, but it is regarding open carried guns. We both have concealed carry, where you can have a firearm on you and under your shirt or under your belt, or the leg of your pants, your trousers, but also, it is legal to have it on the outside, to have a holster on your belt. And so just the other day, I was just a couple minutes from here, and a guy was walking down the street with an open carry gun. So basically, if that is not acceptable to you as an establishment or someone who's in control of a building, you have to post a notice and say, listen, hey, you have a gun on you and it's open carry right now. That's not going to be permitted in this structure. So that's why we see this lettering here on the doorway as we go through. So don't worry, I do not have a firearm. All right, we're gonna go in and please take a look at this water. Story tall. You see these glass elevators coming down from the ceiling. So yeah, that was great music as a child. I'm fairly certain that Bill and Hillary Clinton were also guests of this hotel. They had several trips to San Antonio. If I remember reading, they would stay in this hotel um, back in the late 80s, early 90s. I want to say one more thing that has changed during COVID, and it's just on the other side of where you are looking. We have some artwork that is out. You see, this used to just be an open area, but as COVID changed business models and changed business practices, we started having artists that would set their puzzles and set up their stations in various parts where they could. And so we see one of these artists here saying, do you want a painting of this beautiful area? Well, grab one of these on your way. There's always a chance for some entrepreneurship, no matter what the circumstances of the world are. We'll continue walking in this way along the water. It's flowing toward us, once again representing these acequias. So the acequias were about 4 feet wide, around a meter wide, and they had a very gradual slope so they could carry the water a great distance. And as we're getting up here to this bench, it starts getting more to that traditional acequia that we would expect to see. Today you can still see a working acequia in several parts of the city. One of them, though, is on the grounds of the Alamo. So as you go into the Alamo, they actually have a footbridge, and there's one of these acequias flowing through it. That was the main acequia. We called it the acequia madre. And I love that word. Even acequia, it is not purely Spanish. It's actually from Arabic, where it came from the Moorish influence of Spain, and then they brought this idea with them as they came to San Antonio. And they said, what do we need in this city? By George, we need water, right? Now that we're outside again, I'll take off my mask, and I'll show you some art, which is right here, fantastic mosaic that we see. But before I tell you about that, I do want to check some comments and see if you're watching. Once again, I want to hear from you right now. If you're in Italy, or if you're in the Netherlands, or if you're in France, or if you're in Spain, these are countries that I think of as I look at this mosaic. And so I want to whip out my phone for just a second. Oh, we have someone from Sweden. Anna Sophia, so glad you're with us today. Monterrey, Mexico. Monterrey is so beautiful. Let me know if you have questions. And yes, isn't it a good idea if you're not comfortable with open carried weapons in your building that you can say, this does not work for me? I'm grateful that we have that ability. Okay, so I want to tell you about this mosaic here. It has a name called San Antonio Scenes, and it is from the same year as the construction of this hotel in 1981. It shows some of the most famous sites of San Antonio, some of the most famous scenes of San Antonio. First, I'll just show you the river here. You see the water. Now, that's what you and I have already seen today as we came down the stairs. Here you have one of these high arched bridges once again, so the gondolas could pass underneath it according to Robert Hugman's master plan for this area. But it depicts several other things that I wanted to show you. We'll just borrow this corner for a second. We have San Fernando Cathedral. This is one of only 2 cathedrals in Texas. And so this is maybe a mile from where we are, less than a mile from where we are at the moment. This building here is our courthouse. It's where justice is served in our city and in our county. Here we have a museum, and today it's the museum, but it started as a brewery, believe it or not, the Lone Star Brewery. So the top half, you can see modern San Antonio, or at least structures that are part of our downtown today. The bottom half of this mosaic shows 3 of our missions. So we have Mission San Jose, Mission San Antonio de Valero, which we call the Alamo now, and we have Mission Concepcion over here. 3 of our missions, and there's a total of 5 of them here in San Antonio. I want to point out 2 things before we leave here. I told you I think of Italy when I look at this mosaic. I think of Italy because this is 110,000 pieces of Venetian glass tile that was brought in from Ravenna, Italy, here and put together by an artist named Thomas Stell. And Thomas Stell was American, but he studied art in Europe for many years, and he was fascinated with some of the Flemish and Dutch masters. So if you're from the Netherlands and you're watching this, know that every time I look at this mosaic, I think of my trips to the Rijksmuseum and admiring it myself, the great works of these artists. So Thomas Stell says, listen, if Rembrandt can do this with oil, then can't I also put texture and shadows and lights and perspective that are rich into the work of this mosaic and his other art that he produced? He goes to such incredible lengths to construct this. I told you I also think of France. Well, France is one of 6 flags that have flown over Texas during its history. The French flag is first right up here. That's an old version of the French flag. And it comes from 1685 when the French planted a flag to the far east in Texas. The next flag is the Spanish flag. I told you that's from 1691 that they plant their flag here in San Antonio. We have Mexico's flag, which follows in our history. And then we have more familiar flags beyond the courthouse, the Texas flag, which we still see today, the rebel flag, which is very controversial from the Confederacy and the Civil War. And lastly, we have the US flag in the far right corner. So these are 6 of the flags, the 6 flags that have flown over Texas. We have an amusement park in Texas called Six Flags. That's where it gets its name from, is these 6 flags. So there you have it. There you have it. All these different countries coming together. And then just outside, we have this beer garden, this German beer garden with the traditional Bavarian colors. I love Germany. My family has German heritage, and so I can frequently be found on a plane, hopping over to Frankfurt, getting to go see some friends in different parts of Germany that are over there. That's me going to Germany and getting to travel in Europe. Tell me about yourself. Have you gotten to visit America? Have you been to the US? Have you been to Texas? Tell me what your familiarity is. I want to know what's important and familiar to you. This water that you see, maybe you can pick it up on the mic. I hope you can still hear me well. But this water represents the acequias and how they would carry water from one place to another in San Antonio. So it is not historic. The design, once again, is from 1981, but it represents some historical aspects of San Antonio, that we would use dams to help change the level of the water as it flowed. And in fact, we would use acequias that would carry the water. Aqueducts were part of the acequias. So still today in San Antonio, there's a portion of an aqueduct that you can see. So this water flowing over the walkway here represents that is the aqueduct, and that it was one of many different ways that infrastructure was used for these acequias to carry the water to where it needed to be. And so San Antonio could spread out and develop. Boy, I'm glad it did. It created a city where even I could grow up and call home. So these are our roots. I'll tell you, me growing up, when my parents would bring me here, I was thinking to myself, what a fantastic idea for a swimming pool. I would love this, I'd tell my parents, and my parents would say, yeah, not now. Not now. Keep dreaming, kiddo. So we're just going to keep walking a few more steps here, and we'll be back at street level. We'll walk along the fountains. So once again, you see water, a huge emphasis. It's so important to us in San Antonio. And you know, in terms of a source of water, we actually have what we call the aquifer. It's an underground river
from which we get our water as a city. And every night on the news, they'll report on what the levels of the river are underneath our city so that we know, do we have enough water? Do we need to conserve water? It's very important to us. And in fact, when summer is at its hottest, summer can, the average temperature here in San Antonio, the average high in August is 97 degrees. And so that's 36 Celsius, 97 Fahrenheit. But it's not uncommon for temperatures around 100 degrees, 105 degrees, around 40 degrees Celsius. And so when the temperatures get high, and if the aquifer is running out of water, well, then we have to turn off these fountains. They all stop working, which would disappoint me as a kid, because as Chris was just showing you, I would do this all the time, and I felt like I had superpowers when I was just a little kid. Can you imagine me as a child? I know, my poor parents. But you climb these stairs, and we arrive at the second most, honestly, it's probably it is the most iconic site that you can see here in San Antonio. And between the Alamo, which I'm about to show you now, between the Alamo and the Riverwalk where we've just come from, these are the two things that people say, man, when I go to San Antonio, I want to see the Riverwalk and I want to see the Alamo. Today I get to talk to you and get to show you those things. Now listen, before we go further, as you look around this plaza, I'm going to walk you around to parts of it, but I want to explain a few parts of our history that maybe you're not familiar with. The first is this. San Antonio, I told you, was started by Spanish in 1691, and in fact our first delegation from Spain that followed the explorers were missionaries, and so they built missions here in San Antonio. That's common in parts of Texas. It's certainly common in California too. So the structure of the Alamo started as a mission. It started as a chapel, but really that's not what we remember it for today. Today it is a battle site. It's a place where we think of San Antonio and Texas gaining its independence. And I want to contextualize that for you for a second. Listen, where does the Battle of the Alamo, this structure, where in this battle took place here, right where I'm standing actually, some of the fighting occurred, how does it fit into world history? It goes back to the year 1776, I like to think. That's something, a date that I reference when I think of the Alamo. 1776, we have the American Revolution. And what you find is a group of people here in America, and they say to one another, hey, listen, do you feel like we're in a one-sided relationship with England? Do you feel like we're paying taxes to someone? Do you feel like they don't really care about us, that they're not concerned about our welfare? They say, I think we need to try it on our own. 1776, we have the American Revolution. And they stand and look across the Atlantic and they say, listen, England, this isn't going to work out anymore. Just watching this is Mexico, which is a territory of Spain at the time. And Mexico says, did you just see what the Americans did? Man, I mean, do you feel that way with Spain sometimes? Do you think we're in a one-sided relationship? Maybe we need to make a change here, folks. So from 1810 to 1824, they make this change. And Mexico says, Spain, I want to be independent. I want to be free. And so Mexico becomes its own country during this chapter. And Texas is watching this, and Texas loves this idea of independence. And they say, do you ever get the impression that it's similar between Texas and Mexico, that we're very far away from Mexico City, 1,600 miles, I think that's around 2,400 kilometers. We're very far away, we're having taxes, we're having rules placed on us that we don't agree with and that aren't good. Guys, let's try it on our own. Let's say, enough, we want to be independent too. That's what goes on in 1835, and the response from Mexico relevant to San Antonio takes place February 1836, February 23rd. The General Santa Anna from Mexico rides into San Antonio and he says, there's talk of independence, there's talk of insurrection, and I won't stand for it. And so a battle transpires here in San Antonio as a result of this, of Texas wanting to become independent, to become its own country. And listen, they succeed. The final battle is March 6, 1836, and we lose that battle. We don't win it, but eventually 2 battles later, we win the war and Texas gets its independence. And so it wasn't without great sacrifice though, and that's something that we bear in mind as we're here in Alamo Plaza. Now, before I cross the street, I just want you to take a look real fast at the Alamo and observe what it looks like when a bus is not in front of it. Some people say the Alamo, this is the most iconic structure in San Antonio, maybe in Texas. The Alamo looks smaller than what I imagined. Well, it was supposed to be a lot more similar to Notre Dame, perhaps, in Paris. It was supposed to have 2 bell towers and a giant dome with flying buttresses, but they were not able to complete that because there was such pressure on the area as wars were breaking out here that they wanted to build defense. They wanted walls to be built around this Alamo. So they rededicated their energies, their materials to building protection. And the Alamo that they had planned, 3 stories tall, giant bell towers, a big dome, well, it doesn't actually come to fruition whatsoever. Now, I want to walk in just this direction. As I come over here, I think of my time in London in November for Remembrance Day, for Armistice Day, and how wreaths are laid at the Cenotaph there in London outside Whitehall. Also in San Antonio, we have a cenotaph. I don't know if you're familiar with that word cenotaph. It means empty tomb. It's when you are remembering someone who's passed away in battle, but whose remains you could not lay to rest. You say, well, this cenotaph, this empty tomb, is something where we remember those who have sacrificed. And so we're on the southern front of this monument, and in fact, that's what its name is the Spirit of Sacrifice. You see at the base, you see these cloaked figures, right, as they vanish and their existence is no more. But rising up from it is the Spirit of Sacrifice. And so not only do I think of cenotaphs that you can find in other parts of the world, like in London or Australia, in Sydney, there's a cenotaph also that I've gotten to visit. But I also remember Italy, because this artist that did this work, there was a great competition, I should tell you. It was commissioned for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Alamo. And so 1936, they want to unveil this monument that remembers 189 men who have died during the battle. And so they have a design competition, and a guy, a very accomplished sculptor, says, you don't even need a competition. Here's my design. You're welcome. Go ahead and give me the commission. I'll take care of the rest. And the city says, thanks for the offer, but we're actually going to still leave it open for other submissions. Well, another submission winds up winning out. And this original sculptor that was had such hubris and really wanted to win, his name was Gutzon Berglund, and he wasn't thrilled that he lost. In fact, he left San Antonio following that loss, and he winds up carving Mount Rushmore in the US. Do you know that? Do you know those 4 presidential heads carved into a mountainside? That guy wanted to make this monument, but he didn't get the commission. The man who did, his name was Pompeo Capini. He was from Moia, Italy, in the region of Lombardy, actually. And he comes over here to San Antonio, and he offers a very thoughtful design as to this. He says, I want many different types of characters portrayed, but prominently 4 individuals, David Crockett, Travis, Bowie, and Bonham that we see on the other side. Two people we see here, David Crockett and William Travis. He says, I want them to stand out. And as he goes through this design of the monument, he harkens back to his love of Italian Renaissance art. And in fact, even Leonardo da Vinci himself, are you familiar that Leonardo would dissect and study anatomy so that he could make the most accurate art possible? They say he dissected 30 cadavers, Leonardo da Vinci. Well, Pompeo Capini doesn't dissect anyone, don't worry. But here's what he does. He says, just as Leonardo was concerned with anatomical correctness as he went through his art, so also I want to be accurate. The first model of this monument that he designs, he chooses his subjects, and then he depicts them on this model absolutely butt naked, not a piece of clothing on site. And he says, this is going to be the shoulder of David Crockett. This is going to be the stance. How is he standing? He's standing like this. This is how he is going to be presented. And then he decides, now what am I going to clothe David Crockett with? And how would that frontier's clothing that we see behind me, how would it drape over this shoulder? How would a gun rest against that hand there? And in that way, he designs this sculpture from the inside outward. I love that dedication of art that Pompeo Capini brings to San Antonio, 1936, when he does this. David Crockett's one of the most well-known characters here at the Alamo. If it wasn't raining, if it was a beautiful day, we'd have all kinds of tourists, and you'd see kids running around with hats, just like what he's holding there, made out of raccoons with a tail on the back of it. We call it a coonskin cap. That is still something you can buy little tiny models of here in the stores around the Alamo. Now listen, I've been talking for a good amount of time. I want to check back in with the comments and see what is going on here. So bear with me for a second as I pull these up. Steve from London, so glad that you are here. And our friend from Turkey, Juliustin, I'm so glad you came to San Antonio. I hope you had beautiful weather, sunshine, and not the overcast skies when you were here in the city. I've always enjoyed my time in Turkey when I've gotten to go there. I was there in January last year, in fact, a year ago from today. I'm just reading here. Teresa, thank you for telling us about your time in San Antonio. You got to go to Austin. Boy, Austin and San Antonio are really different cities. Austin has so much steel and glass, and San Antonio doesn't. We're the 7th largest city in the United States based on our population. They say this year we could pass up Philadelphia to become the 6th largest city based on the population in the city limits. But Austin is growing incredibly fast, and their downtown is much more substantive than San Antonio's because they have a lot greater urban density. San Antonio ranks 7th in the US in terms of population today, but our downtown ranks about 31st in the nation for urban density. So that's telling you most people live outside of downtown, not on these streets where we're walking. So let me just finish my reading of your comments here. Thank you all so much, Steve and Teresa and Anne-Sophia and Juliustin. So glad to see the comments that you're sharing with us. Now, I want to, one of my favorite things, not only hearing from guests from all over the world, but also pointing to really random stuff. And something I want to show you here is this sign. You say, wow, Brent, brilliant. I'm so glad that I joined this live tour of San Antonio. I know. This is how I get good reviews online, I tell you what. It just shows you several things. Here we see that coonskin cap that I was telling you about David Crockett, where you can see kids running around with them today. These are some rules about the Alamo, but I don't actually want you to pay attention to the rules. I want you to pay attention to the words here. The Alamo, and look at the shape over them, that iconic shape. I want to mention that to you in just a second. But let's step over here. Let's travel back in time to 1836. That's when the battle takes place here on the grounds of the Alamo. And everywhere we're walking was part of this mission originally. And here's what happens. Listen, you go, Brent, how did it turn from a church into a battle site? I'm not sure how those two things line up. 1793, King of Spain calls on the missionaries and he says, missionaries, I've been paying your bills for a long time now. How much money can I, not money, how much return on investment can I get from my investment of money here? And he's not thinking financial, he's thinking, are the missions still reaching people? Are they still spreading education? Are they still bringing development to this territory of Spain? 1793, the missionaries say, King, we've done everything we can. There's not much more that can take place. King says, don't worry about it. And he cuts off their funding. He withdraws funding over the next couple years. We call this secularization. It's where the missionaries lose their support. And this building goes from being a chapel and being part of a mission compound to just being an abandoned building. Eventually, some soldiers take up residence here, and the Texians use this space as their main base when they have the attack of Mexico in 1836. Speaking of that, I want you to see the grounds were pretty big of the Alamo. We were just looking at the Cenotaph, which is right about here on this model, and when we walked up a minute ago, remember all the water that we were walking with the aqueduct over my head? We approached from this angle here. So the Spanish Mexicans originally attacked from the north side and it was unsuccessful, but on March 6th, they overcame the west wall here. This is where the majority of fighting took place. And here you see the Alamo, here you see that chapel structure, and certainly they used it as a place where they could fight from, they could fire from and shoot cannons from. But most of the face-to-face action, most of the casualties of this battle took place right here on the walls where we were standing a second ago. Here's what I want to show you. Look at the top of the Alamo there. Look at it. It's completely flat. It's unfinished. I told you they had big plans, right? But they didn't get to complete them. So at the time of the battle, it's completely flat, and that's 1836. And you say, well, Brent, you just showed me that sign, right, with the Alamo and that iconic shape. So if it wasn't there during the battle, where in the world did that shape come from? And the answer is Bavaria. It comes to us from someone in Germany. Before I get there, I want to tell you what happened after the battle. We lost this battle, as I mentioned. We fight two more, and we gain our independence from Mexico. We become our own country for 9 years. We are the Republic of Texas. We have embassies in London. If you've been to Trafalgar Square in London, the Texas embassy was located not far from there, just behind where the Canadian embassy is today. We had an embassy in Paris, France. And if you look up, there's a flag flying above this structure here. Above this structure at the very top, there's the Texas flag, and it has a single white star. We call that the Lone Star of Texas. It's all by itself. It represents how we felt when we were our own country. We were by ourselves. We were independent. That was from 1836 to 1845, so it only lasted for 9 years. We were a very poor country. We were had many different threats against us, not just the economy, but also Mexico wanting to regain this territory. And eventually we said, you know what, independence is good, but so is partnership. There's some value to teamwork. And so they joined the United States, not by war, not by purchase. They join the United States by agreement, and they say, let's become partners here to the south. Well, that's 1845 when it becomes part of the United States. And the U.S. military come here to San Antonio. Still, we have a very large military presence in our city. And they show up at this abandoned building, and they say to themselves, that would make a great storage building. Wouldn't that be a great warehouse? But there's a problem. You saw it just a second ago. Flat roof, open air. They said we need to put a roof on it. So in 1850, they decide to put a roof, and the cheapest roof they can put is a pitch roof with a gable at the top, right? And it looks like this. Well, it's a flat surface of the top of the Alamo, and it creates this chasm, this triangle, and they say we need to fill that somehow. And so they contact a Bavarian-born architect. His name is Johann Fries, or we call him John Fries here in San Antonio. And he says, I think I have a design. He says, look here, if you want a pitched roof with this gable, then why don't we put a curved and sloped facade on the front of it? We call it the parapet. So it dates to 1850. It's not part of the original Alamo structure. There was a guy who came to San Antonio in the 1840s. He was from England, so shout out to all our friends in the UK who are watching. His name was Edward Everett, and he was an artist. They told him, before you arrive, before you depart San Antonio, make a study of what the city looks like. So he came to the Alamo and he paints the Alamo. He draws it and sketches it. And that was before that rounded top was added to it. It was just flat on the front. And he really had a tremendous respect for this structure. Well, decades later, he writes a memoir and he said, I cannot believe what they did to the Alamo. It looks like some cheap furniture that they've added onto it. They should have just left it the way it was. And so you see there's some tension when you have something historical, but you're also trying to find a practical use for it and a way to incorporate it into your life, into your city's development. Becomes a hardship. We see that all the way back to the 1850s when the parapet is added, and people go, gosh, I don't love the look of it. I'm wrapping up really our time here in San Antonio, and I just have a few more minutes left with you. So listen to me. If you haven't had a chance to say hello yet, I want to know where you're from. Have you heard that? I want to know, what is something I should see in your city whenever I come for my next visit? I love to travel. I think, 43 countries or something I've gotten to go to. So I promise you, I will look at these comments and I will add these things according to what you suggest. So come on, don't steer me wrong. I'm showing you the best of my city. Let me see the best of yours too. And by the way, if you ever get a chance to come to Texas, come see me here in San Antonio. I'd love to show you in person. The downtown has so much history to it, and we've only gotten to see a small portion today. But before we close, I did want to show you this tree. It's amazing, and we love trees here in Texas. This is a live oak tree, and look at the base of that tree. Look how the branches spread. It almost looks like something out of a movie or out of a novel, with this, kind of tree that's maybe comes to life on occasion. But listen, it's beautiful. It's amazing. And it's not original either. Just like that parapet, here's what happened in, I believe the year was 1912, 1914. A man said we should bring some trees from a different part of San Antonio. So they're local trees, but he said we should add them here to the Alamo. So in around 1912, 1914, they bring some major trees. I don't know what year this was planted exactly, but there's a tree just across the plaza. In fact, right beyond the umbrella, right where I'm pointing beyond the gate, there's this tree. You can't even see it, but child, trust me. Will you trust me? I like this one better, but listen to me. It was 40 years old when they planted it. So these trees, even if they didn't start as acorns growing here in the soil, they're still like 150 years old. I wanted to tell you that because trees are important to us. They're important to you wherever you are in the world. Can we have a shout out for the trees of the world, please? Boy, if ever we need cleaner air and a better place to be around, we understand that more this year than ever. But listen, Not only do we appreciate the beauty and the shade trees bring, it actually adds value to our property here in Texas. So my parents have a bunch of trees on their land, and my dad always told me when I was growing up, he said, Brent, each of these trees could add maybe $1,000 value to the property that we own, and they can add more than that. I actually Googled it before, and people say it can add up to $10,000 of value to your property. That's in general if you're in Texas. But in Austin, just an hour and a half from here, I remember one of you got in to visit Austin. They accidentally damaged a tree that was not this big. They killed that heritage oak tree, and the fine was $5 million that the city assessed for it being damaged. And so we very much like to protect it. The reason why I wanted to talk about that tree and the parapet is because we still have conversation in San Antonio. What do we do now? What do we do? We're 303 years old. We love our city. We want to protect it, but the future is important too. Look here. Look, we have construction fencing. Maybe you saw earlier when you were looking around the plaza. This construction fencing is because they named the Alamo and the 5 missions in San Antonio to the list of UNESCO World Heritage Sites in 2015. Do you have a UNESCO World Heritage Site where you are in your country? Tell me, I want to go see it. Tell me if it's worth the lines and the admission and whatnot. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And they said, let's try to make it the best experience possible for visitors to this city. And some people said, oh, that's fantastic, I love it. And other people said, don't change it, leave things the way they are. We shouldn't be messing with stuff. And what's interesting though is the things that we say leave as they are, in some ways they've also been changed earlier back in our history. We just don't remember it. So it's a really interesting time to see San Antonio, not just because we've got misty skies and overcast gray above us, and that's a rarity with our 330 days of sunshine in San Antonio, but it's an interesting time to be in San Antonio because of this construction fence and wondering, who will win out? Will we leave things the way they've looked for a long time, or will there be changes in our city? Still a conversation going on. Okay, I want to check my phone for comments real fast. Questions, final questions. Chris, any thoughts from you, sir?
Question-wise?
Or in general.
It's awesome. So grateful to have had my first tour of San Antonio.
I'm thrilled. I am thrilled that you did. Okay, I'm checking the comments here. All right.
Just apologies to everyone who were trying to watch on YouTube. That's my bad.
That's right. YouTube's going to work, and
we're going to put this video up on
yeah,
YouTube.
Absolutely.
On, so.
And listen, I didn't get to see your questions live if you're on YouTube, but I want to read your suggestions and where you are from. So don't be shy. Still introduce yourself. Still tell me what country you're from. You've heard all about me. I want this to be a two-way conversation, right? I'll check those comments after the video's posted. Folks, I'm so glad that you're here in San Antonio today. No matter where you are, we've learned the value of being able to join together from disparate places and say, yeah, we can still share, we can still experience something together. After some challenges that we've experienced all together this past year, I'm excited that we can have this new year and share it, and that we can start it off by you joining me here in San Antonio. Thanks so much for your time. If you enjoyed this, if you said, man, this brought a new understanding to me of what things are like in Texas, or helped me enjoy my weekend all the better, would you just write a comment and say, thanks so much? You know, let us know that you enjoyed it. And also, if you can click on the link for leaving a tip, it will be in the chat feed, whether this is recorded or whether you're with us live. We so appreciate the tips that make these tours possible, and it would mean the world to have you express your gratitude that way also. For now though, I'm Brent in San Antonio, and thanking you and Sandeman's Live for being in my city today. I hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.